Senate will come to order. The senators will please take their seats. The senators and all in attendance will please stand for a moment of silence. Please remain standing and be led in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America by Lindley Griffin, Virginia Senate Calendar Clerk.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will call the roll. The Senate will be at ease. Clerk will call the roll. All those present will please record their vote aye.
I don't have mine.
I think it's not working. Your machine's not working? Okay. Okay. We'll strike the vote right now and be at ease so that everyone can get their machines working.
What was not working?
They were trying to vote and it wasn't working.
Helps if they're at their seat.
I think there'll be enough points to kill it. Or the other one.
I might remind them to take their seats.
Well, to me, this is going to get money from the institution now. APCO has a rate case, so it's not applied to them. So for the new bulk of money, it'll apply to people now. But the governor stuff will get it through to them. And then after that, it's like I said, it's a start of a discussion, and I don't think it would pass. I thought it was just going to be. I want to move the negotiating position. Can we combine in the room that we live in? Pick out of a hat. Well, Hearst moratorium, I don't think we can do that. We got to kill that. I'm going to vote against that. Oh, well, the problem, I think her bill, one of the issues I have with it is I think it takes away power from future governors. You know, because the governor should be the one to step in if there's an emergency.
not the General Assembly. So I feel like, for a decade, we were helping to try to take Republican government. Worried they never win it again, and I don't want to buy into that with bills like this. So that's my issue with that one. Well, here's another option. I'm good with carrying it over. Send it to the utility. I'm good with that. Tell them that we do that with all the utility bills. I'm good with that. Keeps us from and I don't want you to be in a position.
The clerk will call the roll. All those present will please record their vote aye. The clerk will close the roll.
You have a quorum, Mr. President. Senate Journal for Tuesday, August the 18th, 2020.
Senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe, moves that the reading of the journal be waived. All in favor of waiving the reading of the journal will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 36, noes 3.
Ayes 36, noes 3. The reading of the journal is waived. The clerk will report any communication from the House of Delegates.
We do not have any, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The clerk will report any communication from the governor.
We do not have any, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Resolutions, petitions, and bills are now in order. Is there any other business to come before the Senate in the morning hour? Seeing none, the clerk will call the calendar.
Senate calendar for Wednesday, August the 19th, 2020. Memorial resolutions.
Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Yes. Mr. President, I move that the memorial resolutions on pages 1 and 2, SR 501 through 515, be considered in the block in the usual manner, waiving the reading of the resolutions, with the understanding that any senator desiring a resolution removed from the block will do so after the clerk has read the title of the resolution.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the memorial resolutions on pages 1 through 2, Senate Resolution 501 through Senate Resolution 515, be considered in the block in the usual manner, waiving the reading of the resolutions thereof, with the understanding that any senator desiring a resolution be removed from the block will do so after the clerk has read the title of the resolution. All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The resolutions are before us in the block. The clerk will read the titles of the memorial resolutions.
Senate Resolution 501, celebrating the life of Nathan K. Kotz. Senate Resolution 504, celebrating the life of George Isaac Parker, Jr. Senate Resolution 506, celebrating the life of Daniel X. C. Senate Resolution 507, celebrating the life of Joe Lou Hairston. Senate Resolution 508, celebrating the life of Darrell C. Smith, Sr. Senate Resolution 510, celebrating the life of Fritz Alexander Campbell Thomas. Senate Resolution 512, celebrating the life of James Wesley Taylor, Sr., DDS. Senate Resolution 513, celebrating the life of Jimmy C. Hill. Senate Resolution 514, celebrating the life of R. Wayne Browning, Sr.
Mr. President, could that come out of the block and by for the day?
Which senator was that?
Senator Lewis, 514.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Senator Lewis. Without objection, Senate Resolution 514 will be removed from the block and go by for the day.
Senate Resolution 515, celebrating the life of Daniel McMath Parker.
And Mr. President, could that come out and by for the day as well?
Without objection, Senate Resolution 515 will come out of the block and go by for the day. The resolutions will be agreed to in the usual manner. All those in favor of agreeing to the memorial resolutions will please rise. The resolutions are agreed to.
Commending resolutions.
Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Sasslaw.
Mr. President, I move that the commending resolutions on pages 2 and 3, that's SJR 502 through SR 502 through SR 519, be considered in a block by voice vote, waiving the reading of the resolutions with the understanding any senator desiring to remove a bill or a resolution from the block will do so after the clerk has read the number of the resolution.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the commending resolutions on pages 2 through 3, Senate Resolution 502 through Senate Resolution 519, be considered in the block by voice vote, waiving the reading of the resolutions with the understanding that any senator desiring a resolution be removed from the block will do so after the clerk has read the number of the resolution. All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The resolutions are before us in the block. The clerk will read the numbers of the resolutions.
Senate Resolution 502.
Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Mr. President.
Sorry. Senator from Alexandria, Senator Evan.
could Senate Resolution 502 be removed from the block and go by for the day?
Without objection, Senate Resolution 502 will be removed from the block and go by for the day.
Senate Resolution 505. Senate Resolution 509, 511, 516, 517, 518, 519.
The question is, shall the resolutions be agreed to? All in favor of agreeing to the resolutions will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolutions are agreed to.
Now turn to your supplemental calendar number 1, blue. Uncontested calendar, Senate bill on first reading, Senate Bill 5036, a bill relating to alcoholic beverage control, local special events license, limitations on events during public health emergency. Regular calendar, Senate bill on first reading, Senate Bill 5032, a bill relating to assault and battery penalty. Announcements. Today, Wednesday, August the 19th, the Committee on Rules will meet 15 minutes after adjournment. This will be a virtual meeting. The Committee on General Laws and Technology will meet immediately upon adjournment of rules. This will be a virtual meeting. The Committee on Commerce and Labor will meet at 4 p.m. This is a virtual meeting. All committees meet in this room. Tomorrow, Thursday, August the 20th, the Committee on the Judiciary will meet at 9:30 a.m. in this room, and this is also a virtual meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there any other business to come before the Senate? Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
I'll wait until, I want to recess, not adjourn.
Okay. Is there any other business to come before the Senate? Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Mr. President, point of personal privilege.
Senator, there's the floor. If you could pull your mic a little closer, Senator, we can hear you a little better.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, we have a commending resolution that was pulled out of the block today, and I feel better addressing this on a point of personal privilege than in speaking on a commending resolution, particularly as it reflects upon the entire career of somebody who has, by all accounts, generally been a fine member of the judiciary. But Senate Resolution 502 raises an issue that really pervades the entire reason we are here today, yesterday, this week, next week, and perhaps the week after. It involves a member of the judiciary from Northern Virginia. And back in April of this year, there was a fellow named Ibrahim Wachi who was arrested and indicted for rape, strangulation, and abduction in a brutal attack upon a victim in Northern Virginia. He was arrested, and on April 9 of this year, over the objection of the prosecutor, which in that particular jurisdiction is quite an accomplishment for the prosecutor to object to the release of somebody, he was released by this judge who made a horrible misjudgment. He was released on a $25,000 bond and walked out of jail. On July 29, he returned to the apartment of his victim and he brutally murdered her, the rape victim for whom he was originally indicted and committed to jail. Now, what I want to point out is that, not that this is a reflection upon a career, but it is symptomatic of what we're doing here this very week. It is a reflection of what the governor's parole board is doing in turning out dangerous, violent felons, the worst of the worst, and doing it in disregard for the laws and regulations that are supposed to govern them. And what we have seen, even from the governor's office, in light of a report that was generated by his own appointed Inspector General, is utter disdain for the rule of law, for the rights of victims, for law enforcement here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That parole board did exactly the same thing in one case that the parole board did at the very beginning of Mark Warner's term. as governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. What did Governor Warner do in response to the actions of his parole board in turning loose a felon who the parole board didn't notify law enforcement and victims about? He fired them, every one of them, over, actually it was 2 cases, my understanding. We have 1 documented case so far, and my belief, and the belief of prosecutors across Virginia and victims' families, is that the disregard by this parole board of the law and the regulations that govern them is systemic, that it is not just 1 case, and we've read in newspapers across the Commonwealth of Virginia multiple cases in which prosecutors were not notified or given an opportunity to object before violent criminals, and these are some of the worst of the worst. In Suffolk, Patrick Schooley was released on parole. He was in prison on multiple life terms for the rape, robbery, abduction, and murder of a 78-year-old woman in that community. And he was turned out without notifying the victim's family or properly notifying the Commonwealth's attorney. In Halifax County, it was Deborah Scrivener who was turned out without notifying the prosecutor or the victim's family, and she was just convicted in 2012 for co-opting her 15-year-old grandson into brutally murdering his own father, her son-in-law, and she got that 15-year-old child to take the body of his father and throw it down a well. It got stuck in the well, and she sent that boy down the well to unstick him and drop him all the way down in the well. And then they had a party out in front of the house. And this was in 2012 that Deborah Scrivener was convicted of this brutal murder. 8 years later, under the guise of the geriatric parole statute, the parole board was so determined to turn her and other people out of prison that it did so without notifying the prosecutor and without notifying the family. You know, this is crazy. You know, it's like a bad DC Comics movie. We've got rioting in the streets of Gotham. So what do? We turn out the Joker, the Riddler, and the Penguin all at the same time. We are sending the wrong message this week to Virginia. We are telling them that we are willing to make gigantic leaps of faith with respect to violent felons. And we see in the news every day how those leaps of faith are not justified. And sure, there are Hallmark movie examples, and we all commend those who have found a way to turn their life around. But what we are seeing from the executive branch is a desire to turn them all out without regard to the concerns of community for safety, without regard to the victims and the victims' rights, without regard to law enforcement and without regard to prosecutors. You know, maybe they better step back and consider the possibility that somebody outside of Richmond, somebody in the community where these crimes took place, might actually have some useful information about whether the release of these felons into those communities makes those communities less safe. Prosecutors deserve to be told. That's why we passed the law requiring it. That's why we passed the law requiring victims to be notified. We must do something. We are telling Virginia that we're willing to take these leaps of faith with respect to these, the worst of the worst. but we're also telling police officers across the Commonwealth of Virginia, we do not trust you. We are here to defund the police, to put restrictions upon you. We are here to tell law enforcement that because cops in other states have done horrible, unjustified things for which they deserve to go to prison, that we are going to defund police here in Virginia. We are going to reward the rioters and punish the cops. And it is wrong. It is wrong. So I'm glad that I was not compelled to make these comments with respect to a resolution. But these comments really reflect upon decisions that we're making. And the most unfortunate decision that was made with respect to the rapist in Northern Virginia who murdered his victim. We better think twice. You know, Virginia hadn't seen most of these bills that are rolling through here with virtually no notice. And yes, we've got interest groups who are lined up to speak online about them, but we are pushing through an agenda that Virginia has not had an opportunity to see or comment upon, and it is going to make communities across Virginia less safe. I read an article yesterday about communities in California in which people are fleeing. Law-abiding citizens can't get law enforcement there. Gangs are overtaking the communities. They are providing the order in communities because police cannot do so. But I guess we're not allowed to look at the example of other states who have been on the leading edge of this defund the police movement. States in which it is virtually impossible to arrest somebody for committing many different crimes, in which it's virtually impossible to get services for people who desperately need services. We have people out there who are victims of drug trafficking, victims of human trafficking, and if some of this stuff that's being discussed in both chambers passes, we're going to be just like California in terms of our inability to get those folks the help that they need, the services that they need, but, you know, we're not going to look at the example of other states and the experiences that they've had. So, Mr. President, I hope that people will reflect upon those comments and the incident in Alexandria as we look at the legislation that's perking its way through.
For what purpose is Senator from Chesterfield, Senator Chase, rise? Senator, I think your mic may not be on.
Oh, don't tell him that. Here it comes. Here it comes.
Can you hear me now?
I see the light on. Can you get a little closer?
Yeah, but there's nobody
Okay.
home.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Senator, we can
There
hear
we
you
go.
now. Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for the purpose of a personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, today I just wanted to apologize to the Virginia residents because what I feel we have done as the state is let down the thousands of parents who are forced to work full-time while also full-time educating their kids. And the localities where they have mandated 100% online education, but given them no resources to offset the cost associated with educating their kids at home. It's also not only an economic and financial hardship, but one of time as well. I think of a number of families in my district, both of which work full-time and are healthcare workers. Both have to go to work during the day, but they're forced to educate their kids at home. Unfortunately, today, the decision in health and education was that we're not going to help Virginia families to balance their work needs with the education needs of their kids. And Mr. President, I'm very concerned that the quality of education in Virginia is going to be determined by someone's zip code. And that's a sad day because I feel that we have let Virginia parents down here in Virginia, not giving them an educational voucher to offset those costs when the localities refuse to honor their constitutional obligation to educate kids in a way that is acceptable and one that works. As a parent of 4 kids myself who's done it all, I've homeschooled, private school, public school, 3 of which of my kids were boys. It's absolutely outrageous to believe that we can have kids sitting in front of a TV screen for 8 hours and call that an education here in Virginia. My heart goes out to the families of the students and the parents just trying to make ends meet right now. I'd hoped today that we would be able to provide them some type of relief, some type of help. But, Mr. President, we've let them down, and for that I apologize. Thank you.
For what purpose is the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey, rise?
Good morning, Mr. President.
Morning, Senator.
Mr. President, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had not planned to speak this morning until my colleague, and I consider a friend from Rockingham, spoke about and decried the decisions and the behavior, the mannerisms of the Virginia Parole Board. But with what he said, I feel compelled to respond. The senator from Rockingham talked about a Virginia that is defunding the police, rewarding rioters, punishing the police, and a chief executive that is simply, it appears to be, when you listen to my friend from Rockingham, has a turnstile where prisoners come in and they go out. Well, let me just share the facts, because this is not the first time that Senator Obenshain has talked about one of those individuals, Vincent Martin. And I read in the paper his comments about Vincent Martin, who was paroled. But let me just share with my colleagues the facts. Vincent Martin was paroled after serving 40 years and 6 months. Now, what kind of prisoner was he in when he was in DOC? He took advantage of every program, every job opportunity, every trustee status level he could make. He became such a stellar inmate that when there was a disturbance in another state DOC facility, who do you think they brought in to quell the disturbance? Vincent Martin. He was up for parole several times and he was denied. Finally, after 40 years and 6 months, and after thorough review by the parole board and a unanimous vote by the parole board, he was granted parole. And when he was granted parole, guess who were his loudest advocates? The guards, the corrections officers at DOC, that he was getting out. And when he got his clothes on and he went through outtake and was leaving the prison, they brought him back at the last moment and said, "You're going to be reviewed again," because of the outcry from certain folks. Now, in addition to being a stellar inmate, he was infraction-free. But my colleague from Rockingham describes a situation that isn't factually accurate. For example, there was comments that the parole board did not, quote, endeavor diligently to contact the victim's family. That's not true. Chairwoman Bennett had a phone meeting with the victim's family. It is true that the victim's family wanted an in-face meeting, and she denied that, but that was due to COVID-19. It is true that the Virginia Parole Board failed to notify the Commonwealth's attorney in Richmond in the statutory period. You have to notify the Commonwealth's attorney within 22 days. The parole board did it within 15 days. The Inspector General also determined that Bennett, quote, did not keep minutes as required by law. That's true. But the reason she didn't keep minutes of that meeting was because the board did not meet at that specific time period. Every other meeting that they held, they had the minutes. And lastly, the Virginia Parole Board not only examined his parole plan, but they dived back into the facts and circumstances surrounding Vincent Martin. They read the transcript. I read the transcript. That matter occurred in Richmond. You know, the parole board chairman described it, the then parole board chairman, as a dark cloud of injustice hanging over Vincent Martin's conviction. And there was and there is. At the preliminary hearing, an individual came in and said the shooter was 6'5". And how did he know that? Because he was there, and he is 6'5", and he recognized how tall the person was. 30 days later, he came in a trial, and that person shrunk to 5'7", which was the height of Vincent Martin. Oh, by the way, the co-defendant was actually, and who gave testimony against Martin, he was 6'5". Now, the three other co-defendants were also convicted of first-degree murder. They were released after serving their respective jail terms in the late 80s and the early 90s. But Vincent Martin was released in 2020. Now, I just want to know, what do you have to do to redeem yourself? What do you have to do to show the world that you have improved? You've spent 4 decades in jail. You've done everything that they've asked. You're infraction-free. You're the go-to guy they call when something goes wrong. What more do we do? We can't draw and quarter them. We can't execute them. If we believe in redemption, if we think redemption is good for the soul, then you give them a second chance after 40 years. And let me just end by saying this. My friend, and he is a friend and colleague from Rockingham, talked about law and order. I hope that when we have any discussion regarding parole or OSIG legislation, that there will be a penalty imposed when a secretive OSIG report that is released to the leaders in the legislature is subsequently disseminated to the press, which is contrary to law. Thank you, Mr. President.
For what purpose is the senior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator D. Steph, rise?
Mr. President, can you hear me? Great. I'm glad you can. Mr. President, I'm glad we pulled resolution number 502 out. And I know a lot of folks have thought that Judge Nolan did a great thing in his career. He probably had a wonderful career. But to me, it doesn't sound like something that we should be commending him for when he releases Ibrahim Barachi, who was indicted on December 6th on 6 felonies, indicted in December on 6 felonies to not only include rape, sodomy, strangulation, abduction, and burglary charges, then was put in jail without bond. Despite the objection of the prosecutors, he permitted Barachi to have a $25,000 bond and be released. Less than a month after his release from Alexandria Jail, he was arrested again on May 8th for ramming a K-9 officer's vehicle. He remained free, and on July 29th, he shot and killed Carla Dominguez, the victim of his first violent strangulation, rape, and abduction. Mr. President, the resultant death of the victim and also of Mr. Bellucci himself. So even if you believe that he was not guilty of the original offense, the actions of the judge contributed to the death of these two people. Mr. President, what about the victims? Are we going to only look at what happens to the criminals, just let them out of jail, let them go? What about these victims, Mr. President, and when they relive the crimes when we release these individuals? And I'd like to highlight the facts in the overwhelmingly brutal murder of Mr. Albert Hamilton, 68-year-old Grayson County resident. Mr. Albert Hamilton Sr. was shot multiple times in the head and neck, and his body was located in the New River, bound and weighted down with a cinder block. Godfrey pleaded guilty to all 3 crimes in which he was charged. However, simultaneously denied his guilt and did not accept responsibility for his actions. In '94, Godfrey escaped from custody, was recaptured after 36 hours on the loose as a fugitive. While technically Godfrey did not receive a life sentence, a 200-year penalty, 200-year punishment in prison, in all actuality is multiple life sentences. And under codes, our laws, section 53.1, 151B, it says, any person sentenced to life imprisonment who escapes from a correctional facility or from any person in charge of his custody shall not be eligible for parole. Under the spirit of the law, Godfrey never should have been released from prison. Mr. President, since we're talking about these victims, since we're talking about these people, yesterday in the rehab, we had a young lady who had the courage to talk to us about being raped. She had the courage to talk to us about once her rapist was released from prison, he got out, how horrible she felt. But you know what, Mr. President? As a victim, that wasn't the worst of her feelings. She felt even more horrible when he raped somebody else. And Mr. President, I ask you, what about the victims? What about these victims? We're all about the criminals. Let's let them out of jail. Let's let them go. Let's let them allow them to do it again, Mr. President. Who's going to look out for the victims? What about these victims? What about Deborah Schneider, who didn't only throw the body down the well, she also had her 15-year-old grandson help her burn the evidence. A 15-year-old grandson who she sent down the well to jump up and down on the body until it released and fell to the bottom. Mr. President, she served 8 years of a 24-year sentence. The parole board neglected to provide the prosecutors with the required 21-day notice of its decision and also failed to notify the family. Mr. President, she had a party in the yard after doing this heinous, horrible crime, and she's now let out to go and do whatever she wants. Mr. President, what about Patrick Shuley Jr., convicted of abducting, robbing, raping, and stabbing a 70-year-old woman? 78 years old, Mr. President. He confessed to the crimes, received 3 life sentences. The parole board gave the prosecutor 1-day notice on his release. 1 day. Mr. President, these people should not be released. What about the victims? Those who can speak for themselves and those who can't because they're not around anymore. Mr. President, we're here to represent the victims, not just the criminals. And we have to do that. Mr. President, what about Donald Lee Brooks? He was shot with a .357 Magnum, then slashed his throat. Found guilty of second-degree murder and weapon charges, sentenced to 28 years, served 10, and then released. Horace E. Brunette III, convicted of murder-for-hire deaths of 2 women, Carolyn Fox, 46, Lillian Fox, 71. The women were brutally bludgeoned to death and buried alive. Sentenced in 1992 to life plus 30 years, released April 2nd. Prosecutors in Nelson County said almost every requirement of the parole board was not, I repeat, Mr. President, was not followed. Mr. President, what about Dwayne Markey Reed, involved in 2 murders on the same street within 3 years? Robbed and shot the victim, 32 years old. Thomas Runyon in the head, convicted of robbery, murder, but later reduced to just robbery. Served 11 months. 7 months after he was released, killed another man during a drug deal. Received 2 life sentences plus 5 years. suspended one life sentence, spent 20 years in prison. Mr. President, we've heard enough about Mr. Vincent Martin, but maybe not. He was shot. He was a Richmond police officer shot. He shot Michael Connors 5 times, execution style. He was sentenced to life, previously granted parole from previous felony convictions to include attempted murder. The family did not receive notice. He was not being considered for parole. Inspector General concluded the law, policy, and procedures were not followed by the parole board. Robert Godfrey, he killed Albert Hamilton, who I just talked about. Brutal murder, shot multiple times in the head, weighted him down with cinder blocks, and dumped in the New River. Mr. President, he was charged and given 200-year sentence. He escaped from prison and was recaptured. He was set to be released after just serving 13% of his time. The Grayson County prosecutor alerted the administration of these irregularities and said, enough. What about the victims? Mr. President, I ask you, who's going to protect the victims of these crimes? What about the victims? We hear nothing but about the criminals. I want to hear about the victims. I want to make sure we look out for these victims. Thank you very much.
For what purpose is the senator from Western Fairfax? Senator Marsden rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. A lot of the concerns over recent paroles were emanated from a report done by the Office of the Attorney General and involving the Vincent Martin case. And I do have to correct the junior senator from Richmond, is that it originally was a 15-day notice to the Commonwealth Attorney, but noticing that that would have been a violation, the head of the parole board in Virginia notified the Department of Corrections, and the date of his release was extended so that the 21-day rule could be met. As a matter of fact, I have 8 different accusations or conclusions drawn by the Office of the Attorney General, and every one of them is refuted by the parole board because of misinterpretation, of confusion between the role of the Department of Corrections and the Virginia Parole Board, corrections that the victims and the victims' families made that, yes, indeed, they were notified, every one of them. And I'd be glad to share this with everyone here. I'm not here to comment on all the parole decisions that have been made and the awful things that human beings do to each other and the terrible things that victims go through. I spent now 30-some years in the juvenile justice system dealing with victims, and of course we feel terrible about it. But we do have a parole system in Virginia, and we do have procedures that they are to follow, and they followed them absolutely to the best of their ability, corrected potential mistakes that were about to happen, that didn't happen because of their diligence. And I just don't want to see the parole board put into a situation here where they're being accused of things that they did not do. Their decisions are their decisions. We can agree with them, we can disagree with them. But they followed the law in this case, and I'd be glad to send around these points as to what actually happened in the Martin case for your edification. And I thank you, Mr. President, for your time.
Thank you, Senator. For what purpose is the senator from Eastern Fairfax? Senator Servell rise.
Sorry, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I was hoping that we might get through this session without hearing about the Buachi case, because that case has absolutely nothing to do with any reason we're here. There's not a single bill that we voted on that I'm aware of in the last 5 years, or a single bill that's pending in either chamber that has anything to do with what happened in that situation. The man was given a cash bond, and he went and did something in violation of the cash bond. There's no cash bond proposals out there, and I'm not aware of any amendments that have been made to cash bond in the last 5 years. So what he has to do with what we're doing in this special session, I don't understand, but it's an unfortunate distraction. I would also just point out that since that happened, I've had some judges that have reached out to me, and they have suggested that the existence of a cash bond system makes scenarios like that more likely, because lots of times judges feel more comfortable releasing people that are dangerous because they can give them a cash bond instead of putting them on intensive pretrial monitoring or leaving them locked up. And so I would just suggest that if you want to have a debate about that policy, we can have that debate, but it's not, I don't think it's quite as intuitive or simple as others might think. I'm not going to get into the parole board. I think you've heard enough from the junior senator from Richmond and the senator from Western Fairfax about that. Mr. Schooley, Patrick Schooley, that was a crime that was committed in 1979 when I was 8 years old. Schooley served 41 years in prison for a crime that was committed when he was a juvenile. The United States Supreme Court in 2012 held that we are not allowed to hold juveniles their entire life. They have to have a reasonable opportunity to parole. In 2016, they held that was retroactive to people that are already incarcerated. So sure, we could leave him locked up forever. And you know what? We'd be violating his constitutional rights. We can't do that. These people have to be released at some point when they commit crimes as juveniles. It's required by our law, by our Constitution, by our United States Supreme Court. Now, y'all may not like that, but trying to say that us following the Constitution is in some way inappropriate or illegal or immoral is nonsense because it's the law. So we can try and connect the dots to these things that have nothing to do with why we're here. But it's a big diversion. I heard a moment ago a reference to Mark Warner filing the parole board. So Governor Warner fired the parole board because the parole board wouldn't parole anybody. They were a bunch of Gilmore holdovers, and they wouldn't parole anyone. That's why the board got fired. It wasn't because they were releasing too many people or anything that the senator from Rockingham insinuated has anything to do with what this board's about. And I want to talk about the theme of this session. Yesterday, the Senate Judiciary Committee referred to Finance, a very significant criminal justice reform bill, or actually a policing reform bill. Much of the stuff, probably, depending on how you count, but some of the major reforms that were contained in that legislation were requested by law enforcement. Requested by law enforcement because they want to raise the standards in this state, because they want to be able to root out bad apples, because they want to be able to do something about police officers that they can't get rid of. We've had systems in this Commonwealth been in place for a long time that prevent bad apples from being thrown out. All they do is hop from department, 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 department. And trying to suggest that a bill that is going to improve the quality of policing, trying to professionalize our police, trying to get all these agencies to become accredited so they will live by the standards that professional police departments live by is not in some way anti-victim or anti-law and order or in some way going to put anybody in danger. It's going to make everybody safer. That's what all this is about. And the only people that are talking about defunding the police are people in the minority party. We're not talking about that. That's not our agenda. Now, you can keep beating that horse, but that's not what this is about. And in terms of notice, our caucus put out a press release describing exactly what our proposal was from end to end on June the 26th. That's now been pending for nearly 2 months. We've had, I think, 3 public hearings. The House of Delegates has had 3 or 4 public hearings. The bills have been put out there for shareholders. We put our police reform legislation out, I think, 2 weeks ago. Maybe it was August the 6th. No, I'm sorry. We put the legislation out a week ago. We announced we had a further announcement about it on August the 6th. We put the actual legislation out a week ago. We've been sharing the drafts with the minority in the last 2 weeks as we've been refining it. We've been sharing it with stakeholders. The public knew this session has been coming now for probably 3 weeks. Colorado, George Floyd was murdered on May 25th. Colorado acted on June the 13th with a comprehensive Police Reform Act. The governor of Arkansas acted on June the 9th. The governor of California acted on June the 9th. Connecticut acted on June 15th. Iowa adopted comprehensive legislation June 12th. Minnesota on June 21. New Jersey on June the 5th. And there are dozens of cities that have enacted reforms. We're late to this party, folks. And anybody that says they're surprised or that there's some shock that we're doing this hasn't been paying attention. And this is the last thing I would say before we continue to dive into this for the next week or 2 or 3 or whatever, is I'm sure we're going to continue to hear about horrible scenarios or people that have done bad things. I just want the body to remember that we've been down this path before. When I was in high school, we went down this path. We went down this path back in the 1980s and probably many times before I was paying a lot of attention. I just want everybody to remember that when Lee Atwater was on his deathbed, when Lee Atwater was dying, There's one thing he did. He called up Michael Dukakis and he apologized. So just think real careful before we go and get out there and try and turn these criminal cases, all these random criminal cases, into something about what we're here for today. It isn't why we're here. We're here to improve law enforcement, to improve public safety, and to make Virginia a better place.
For what purpose is Senator from Hanover? Senator McDougal rise.
Mr. President, I rise for the point of personal privilege.
Senator, has the floor.
Mr. President, I find it somewhat disturbing that we're listening to the conversation and we hear that it's an unfortunate distraction that victims across this Commonwealth are having to be re-victimized. So I'm going to tell you a story that happened in Lancaster County, August 24th, 1985. On that day, a gentleman went into the backyard of a home while the lady was taking her trash out. Her husband was at work that night on a Midhaven boat trying to earn a living for his family. Their 1-year-old and 4-year-old children were in the house. In the house. He abducted her and killed her, put concrete on her, dumped her in the river. Mr. President, that family was devastated, still devastated today. Y'all might have gotten the email from some of the family members. The family took the appropriate steps. They signed up with the parole board to get information so that they could be able to tell their story and how this individual had been accused of other criminal acts prior to this, had been seen peeping into other people's homes, how even though they had no infractions in the system, had other inmates send letters to the family saying that they wanted to come back and talk with them, that they wanted to come back and visit with them. Now you think about that. What if that was your sister or your wife or your daughter that was killed and you get that letter? Would you not want to be able to express to the parole board how this individual should not be on the street? They were sentenced to 99 years plus a day for her murder, 65 years for kidnapping. Remember, the family had signed up through VineLink to get all the appropriate notifications, had received some early on, and then all of a sudden, they found out the gentleman's been released. He's on the street. But when they contact the parole board, one of the current members talked to them. They said, don't worry. We've put him on supervised probation. He is limited geographically, can't even go within 100 miles of where you live. Not even 100 miles. And that will be in place to 2098. Well, Mr. President, we're in 2020. And earlier this year, during the time of COVID, this individual is in the community. They contacted, again, officials, and they said, oh, well, he was fine after less than 3 years on probation, so instead of 2098 being on supervised probation, instead of being watched by that stringent system that the parole board has set up, he's now walking around in the community, not on supervised probation, not restricted to the area. Well, Mr. President, this individual took the life of a woman who had done nothing except tried to protect her kids while the children were in her house. And now he's on the street, in the neighborhood, and reaching out to those victims to want to contact them. That's abhorrent to me. There are people certainly that have done horrible acts in their life that deserve forgiveness, and our system should be set up so that we can have forgiveness. But Mr. President, there are some things that you do where you still have to pay a price. Even if we forgive you, even if you do the right things going forward, when you kill somebody, abduct them from their home, take them from their children, and dump them in the river, you should be in the penitentiary. You should not be contacting the family. You should not be walking around in their community. Mr. President, we do have some decisions to make here. We made a couple yesterday. We're going to continue to talk about them. But I want you to think about Mary Kaiser Harding. When you press those votes, remember, she did not make it to her children's graduations. She did not make it to their weddings. She is certainly not with us here today. But, Mr. President, the decisions we make could impact one of our family members just the same. We do have an obligation for justice and fairness, but we equally have an obligation to protect our families and protect Virginians for people that do horrific acts.
For what purpose does the Senator from Alexandria, Senator Eben, rise?
For a point of personal privilege, sir.
Senator has the floor.
I hadn't planned to speak on the commending resolution I introduced today, but after my disappointment that the senator from Rockingham would choose to grandstand on the back of a respected, now retired 26-year jurist, I feel compelled to. I want to first associate myself with the remarks from the senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Survell, that the tragedy that occurred is not something that's addressed or that would at all in any legislation that's before us in this special session that I'm aware of. And I also want to let the senior senator from Virginia Beach know he simplified the case a little bit just for his clarification. The issue that happened after the defendant was out on bail was in another state, and if Virginia had known about that charge, surely the bail would have been revoked. But Judge Hawkins became Alexandria's first black judge in 1994 and was elevated to the circuit court in 2000. He instituted one of our first family drug court treatment courts in the state, and as a young man, he integrated our local high school, George Washington High School, becoming one of only 5 African-American students graduating in his class. He went on to serve in the Army, and I certainly have not examined each and every decision that any one judge, including Judge Dawkins, made in this Commonwealth, but he's an honorable man and he deserves better than to be used as a political punching bag today. Thank you.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Roanoke County, Senator Suderline, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President, for a point of personal privilege.
The senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to point out some things. We just heard the timeline of when other states acted and what the point of this special session was. I would just like to remind folks that 2 Democratic delegates called for a special session before we adjourned from the regular session within the first week to address COVID-19 because they correctly saw that there was going to be lots of policy decisions that we'd need to make in advance. I think about a day or 2 after that, I saw the Republican Senate leader call for a special session related to COVID-19 policies. When we were here in this building in April for the reconvene session, a petition was circulated for us to go into special session earlier. It was made clear that the administration did not want members of their party supporting it, and so it was withdrawn. I didn't think it should be withdrawn. I thought that it was important that we go forward with that petition. Unfortunately, it wasn't my petition, but that's why we have the delay that we have. The senator from Western Fairfax, I think, had good points for his point of view on the parole board, and something that he said, though, was that we could agree or disagree with the parole board's decisions. Unfortunately, though, we don't know who makes the decisions because the votes aren't public. I have a bill on that subject. I usually would not stand to speak about a bill before it might be heard in committee, but I don't know how many committee meetings there are going to be, and the committee that it's been referred to is scheduled to meet this afternoon, and it is not on the docket. In fact, most of the bills that have been referred to that committee are not on the docket. Several of those bills are ones that were filed more than a month ago. So as soon as this filing was possible, those bills were made available. So I hope that, like the Judiciary Committee, just decide to have a second meeting. I hope that any other committee that doesn't meet its entire agenda right now of bills inside its committee will meet subsequently again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose, the Senator from Franklin County, Senator Stanley, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I was sitting here idly by, looking at my watch, wondering how long we would be here, hoping it would be a shorter day, not wanting to, quite frankly, contribute to the length. But as I sat here and listened to my friends, including one from Eastern Fairfax, who, quite frankly, Mr. President, I was raised legally with him in the sense that we ran the halls with Senator Peterson, myself, Dave Albo, Fairfax in the 90s. We learned the same things. We won the same way, we lost the same way. We saw some really good judges, and we saw some not so good judges. And we learned. We learned the same law as criminal defense attorneys. We do the same things because we believe we're fighting for justice when we defend those that have been accused of crime. And we do so not just to represent the guilty, but also to protect those that have been wrongly accused. But when my friend from Eastern Fairfax, who grew up in the law with me, says here today and accuses us of using, these quotes, random criminal cases that have no meaning and no purpose for what we're trying to do here, I take umbrage with my friend. When a person is brutally murdered, lost by their family, that, Mr. President, is not a random criminal case. When a woman is abducted and brutally raped, that, my friends, is not a random criminal case that has no meaning. For if we were here for the serious issue of police reform, then we must also be here in protection of the victim. That we do not allow our laws to be eroded, that eventually harm the innocent. That where is a balance, always there is a balance in a free society and a criminal justice system that I practice in. There is that balance where we protect the rights of the accused, but also the sanctity of the victim. And then I heard from my friend over from Alexandria that the senator from Rockingham somehow was grandstanding, his exact quotes, on the backs of a fine retiring judge. I do not recall in the point of personal privilege that the senator from Rockingham ever said he was a bad judge or commented on his entire career. But ladies and gentlemen, while I did not have the privilege to practice before this judge, what he did was inexcusable. We, those of us who practice in criminal defense, Mr. President, know that when someone is charged with a crime such as rape and those other dangerous felonies, that there is a rebuttable presumption against bond. And I have had bond hearings, standing next to a defendant, a client of mine, with that rebuttable presumption. But it's a presumption against bond because of the very thing that this legislature determined for itself, that there is no adequate way that the criminal justice system, if they let the person out on bond who's been charged with a heinous crime, there is no adequate way that we can protect the public from that person, even understanding that that person is innocent before proven guilty, because these are not just your regular larceny crimes. These are crimes against other human beings, upon which our system of justice, upon which our police officers, we have been tasked to protect. It is not grandstanding when she got raped. It is not grandstanding to mention her name, to remember her innocent life. Because if that rebuttable presumption if that part of the law was adhered to by the judge that we speak of now, then that person accused of rape would still be in jail and the victim would still be alive. Don't tell me anything different. Don't tell me that it's just a random criminal case. Because we're not the ones that are trying to make mountains out of molehills. We're the ones that are pointing out that justice requires balance. Justice tempered with mercy does not have to go to mercy for the accused and no justice for the victim. And here we go today, and we are going to be in here and we need to debate these issues. But I will defy anybody on the other side of the aisle to condone the violence, to condemn the violence that was out on the streets of Richmond. To think about the lives that have been lost, the people that have been injured because someone wants to commit a criminal act against another, against an innocent. But somehow, that too is just a random criminal case. That too somehow can be justified because of the underlying political purpose. We are here for a very important reason, but we must be reasonable. We can't rely on talking points or what's in the paper or what's the flavor of the week in terms of a political agenda. We need to think about the victims as much as we think about those that are before the bar of justice in our criminal justice system. Thank you, Mr. President.
What purpose is Senator from Hampton, Senator Locke, rise?
Thank you, Mr. Can you hear me?
Yes, Senator, I can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't want to prolong this, and it certainly was not my intent to even say anything. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not as eloquent as those who stood and spoken before me. But I did want to say that there is nothing in any of the legislation that we have presented that addresses the issue of police reform or criminal justice reform that has said absolutely anything about defunding the police. You have not heard that from anybody on this side in any of our legislation about defunding the police. It has not been said by any of us. You know, I didn't hear it. We've not said anything about eroding laws. We haven't said that about eroding laws. But what's interesting to me is that our colleagues are very good. I have to give them credit. They are very good at changing the narrative whenever the existing narrative does not benefit their agenda. They're very good at changing the narrative. What we're about is making our communities safe. We want our communities to be safe. But at the same time, we want those communities to be fair, and we want those communities to be just. What happened to George Floyd was not just. Yes, it happened in Minneapolis. But one of the things that I wrote shortly after that was watching that man have someone put his knee on his neck brought forward to me 400 years of somebody's knee being on my neck for 400 years. So that's why I said to my colleagues, we need to address police reform here in Virginia, not because of what happened in Minneapolis, but because Virginia has its own problems. And if we don't think that they don't exist here in Virginia, then we're closing a blind eye to our own problems. Let's get real, Virginia. We did so by going through engagement with our public and transparency. You know, we didn't go through a cloak of darkness in what we were going to do. What we have done, the senator from Eastern Fairfax clearly outlined what we did and how we did it. So my reality comes through the lens of an African-American woman who has to talk to African-American children, particularly African-American boys and men, of how to interact with law enforcement. I'm pretty sure that some of my colleagues do not have to say, watch what you say, how you hold your hand, how you talk, and come home alive. That's why I'm standing here talking about police reform. They don't have to say that to their children. I have to even say that to my 40-year-old nephew who is a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army. Watch what you say and watch what you do. They don't see you as a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. They see you as a 6'2" black man when they interact with you. Watch what you say and watch what you do. I am here for justice and fairness. That's why I'm here. It's not about defund the police or eroding laws. I'm here for justice and fairness. I condemn the violence. I don't want anybody out there breaking windows or throwing things at the police, or hitting the police. I support law enforcement. I think the Capitol Police did an awesome job, and they continue to do an awesome job. The state police do an awesome job, and I support the state police. But people who protest and do protests for change, and they do so peacefully, we should support that. Why would we not want them to do that? And we can raise all kinds of issues that have been wrong. And those people who do wrong should be prosecuted for doing wrong. But we're here to bring about change. And we talk to people and engage with people who want that same change. So why are we being castigated for wanting to bring about real positive change? That's why I'm here, Mr. President. That's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Russell, Senator Chafin, rise?
Mr. President, I rise for a brief point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
I've listened to the comments of my colleagues, and I think that a lot of what we've been hearing can be boiled down to human behavior and the predictability of human behavior, both acceptable human behavior and utterly unacceptable human behavior. Now, just as the parole board and the Department of Corrections is saying goodbye to a lot of the inmates in the Department of Corrections, we just as well be saying goodbye to our recidivism rate for criminals here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Commonwealth has enjoyed 4 years of leading the nation with the lowest rate of recidivism of any other state in the entire nation. And that has made the Commonwealth of Virginia a much safer place to live. That has made the Commonwealth of Virginia a much better place to do business. That has made the economy in the Commonwealth of Virginia a much stronger economy. So, Mr. President, I would say to you and my colleagues that human behavior is predictable. It is predictable. And as my grandmother used to say quite often, when allowed out, the hens will come home to roost. They were predictable. And Mr. President, I predict these hens will come home to roost too. Thank you.
Thank the senator. For what purpose the senator from Northwestern Fairfax? Senator Boysko rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the Senate, I feel like we are rehashing yesterday's debate on the earned sentence credit. I would like to point out once again that the bill does not release or give the option for increased numbers of earned credit for violent felons. We have heard today a long discussion about the horrors that women have gone through who are victims of rape. I myself have many friends who have been victims, and I know the pain and the horror that they live with every single day, and my heart goes out to everyone who has endured violent crime against their bodies. However, I will say once again, the bill that we are talking about in this chamber that we have been considering excludes anyone who has perpetrated a violent crime on a woman, including rape, including murder, including malicious wounding. They are not part of the debate in this Senate chamber. We are talking about thoughtful, evidence-based ways to reform our prison system. We are talking about police reforms that we've worked hand in hand with our chiefs of police, with the state police, with the sheriffs, and there is consensus among the activists who are working for change and resolution, as my good friend from the eastern portion of Virginia has talked about. These are common sense things. We know that what we have been doing does not work. Warehousing people in a violent situation only creates more violence. And 95% of the people who are in prison are going to be coming out. We want a safer community for everyone at the end of their term. And things like earned sentence credit and giving meaningful opportunities for redemption and reform are evidence-based. They have worked in other states. They have worked in other nations. This country incarcerates more people than the entire world, and Virginia is above the average in the United States. We need to make a change, and we need to make that change on thoughtful, evidence-based practices that have been proven effective. And I would like to, for the record, again, just make sure that everybody hears that the bill that we have been talking about eliminates the opportunity for violent criminals to take part in the expansion of the legislation that we're discussing. Thank you very much.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard? Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Sasslaw.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Senator, if you speak into the mic, we can hear you.
I sometimes think I'm Alice in Wonderland. First off, deal with one brought up by the senior senator from Chesterfield. Interestingly enough, several of the school districts already that opened up for 100% in-person teaching have already shut down as a result of this pandemic. and the kid's coming down with that. There's some on the verge of doing that, and at the higher education level, University of North Carolina was only open 4 days when the people started coming down with testing positive for COVID, students there, so they've now gone to 100% virtual. But the main topic that seems to be dealt with here today has been the criminal justice and our reaction to it, or not. And well, I generally don't, try to identify with anybody's remarks, identify pretty closely with what Senator Locke, the senator from Hampton, said, and it's by and large pretty darned accurate. I don't know of any, if there is one, I'm not aware of it, I don't know of any governmental agency in the Commonwealth that's defunding police. I can tell you they're not doing it in Fairfax, and it's not in the governor's budget. You had to make cuts, but there's no intention to defund police. We need police. We might need to change recruitment and training tactics and maybe make the pay better, but we're certainly not doing away with police. Now, with respect to how we're going to empty out the prisons and our recidivism rate's going to skyrocket again, there were 4 of us who are in the room today who were in the room when we ended parole. Myself, Senator Norman, Senator Howe, Senator Lucas. I'll tell you what the catalyst for that was. Can you all still hear me if I face you? No. You're not just saying that to, want to look at me. Anyway, I think I'll do it like this. What kind of kicked all that off was a situation that occurred, I think it was in Southwest Virginia. And there was a young man who, he had raped this woman, and I think he got a 15, 16-year sentence. And at that time, you got 2 days off for every day you behaved in prison. And he served about 5 years, 6 years. He got out, and within a matter of weeks, he raped and killed somebody who lived nearby. That was the case that wound up on the cover of Time magazine, and everybody said, he didn't do it, and there was all kinds of evidence and this and that. And this, I remember having people from Hollywood come in and visit me in the GAB telling me, we killed an innocent man. And finally, Mark Warner, who was governor at the time, nearing the end of his term, decided once and for all we're going to find out. The DNA system had dramatically improved since this man's conviction. Well, he had the body exhumed, and sure enough, he was the one that raped and killed this woman, okay? So we enacted, no parole. At the time, our recidivism rate was 67%, one of the more higher ones in America. Last few years, it's been in the low 20s, and as was pointed out a little earlier, we have the lowest recidivism rate in the country. But that doesn't mean that, there's always room for improvement. The bill that Senator Boysko had, as you pointed out, we're not putting violent felons in there. If you committed murder, rape, armed robbery, child molestation, a whole list of what we consider to be violent felons, you're not going to be in that bill. Now, depending on whose numbers you believe, I've been told that it's anywhere from 20 to 25% of the people we have in the state prison system are nonviolent felons. The rest are, okay? And after we passed the no parole, and before anybody starts assuming that that's all just another Democrat soft on crime, let me give you a little bit of my background since I've been here. In 1976, my first year in the House, as a result of a situation that occurred where I lived, where a juvenile had broken into a house and raped this woman, we used to have on the books, you had to find that he was not amenable to treatment as a juvenile before you could certify him for trial as an adult. I changed that because 6 weeks after he got out, he raped another woman, okay? So I struck the thing and said that if you're 16 years or older, they don't have to find that you're amenable to treatment as a juvenile. That bill passed the House of Delegates 99-1. I don't remember what the vote was in the Senate, but it passed and became law. Several years later, I put in the bill that said you commit an armed robbery with a gun, mandatory 3 years. And if the second time you do it, mandatory 5. The very initial 3 strikes and you're out was my bill. Now, when I put it in, what I intended was the third time into the Department of Corrections system. Somewhere along the line, it got changed. And now, if you commit 3 felonies before they arrest you, they consider that 3 strikes. I also put in, and it passed, and later Senator Newman amended it, the multiple murders bill, calling for the death penalty on that. But, and I don't regret any of that, not for a second. And I still support capital punishment in certain circumstances, okay? But you all remember who Jim Webb is, or most of you know who he is. Jim was a U.S. Senator for 6 years and was a highly, and when I say highly, it's probably an understatement, decorated Vietnam War hero, okay? DSC winner. And in Congress, he gave a speech, and he pointed out these numbers, that we're 4% of the world's population, but we're 25% of all the people incarcerated on this planet. And he said that either we're the most evil people on the planet or we're doing something wrong. And he said, he didn't, and I agree with him, we're certainly not the most evil people on this planet by a long shot, okay? Maybe some of you think I am, but we are doing something wrong. And we now have, we had about 16, 17, 18,000 people in prison. We quickly jumped to over 30 when we did this. And running those prisons is not free. And more, for me, it's more financial than humanitarian, is that we need to make some changes. Are we going to turn everybody loose? Absolutely not, and I would have nothing to do with it, and my colleagues would have nothing to do with it. And everybody in here needs to know that. But obviously, when, we have a far higher prison rate than everybody, we probably can fine-tune it a little and also cut down the cost. We're having trouble, as you know, funding K through 12, funding higher ed, funding social services. And car tax with Gilmore didn't help. But, but there's some things that we can do to make this a better government. And like I said, I'm not so much interested in this as a humanitarian thing as I am from a financial. There's other people in my caucus, with them it's the other way around. Fine, I accept that. But, one of the things we don't need to be doing is pointing fingers at each other saying, you're turning loose all these people and, all hell is going to break loose in society. It's not. They weren't violent when we sent them in, and those are the people that are going to be eligible for reinstating parole. And by the way, it was when we initially had good time, and I would say this to Senator Chafin because he had commented on this, when we had good time, it was, as I pointed out, it was 2 days off your sentence for every day. I think the net effect of what Senator Boysko's bill comes down to is instead of 2 days off at the peak that you reach, I think it's 15 days a month or 15 days for every day, for every 30 days that you saved. So it's been cut down. We are going back to it for nonviolent felons, but we are going back to it at a greatly reduced rate. So, keep that in mind. We can't run these prisons for free. And some of the people, the cost I think is what, 30-some thousand a year. That's more than what it costs to send a kid to UVA. And it seems to me that we can find something better for these people to do if they're nonviolent. I'm not saying they shouldn't have gone in the first place, but we might find, and particularly if they behaved as called for in that bill, they've been model prisoners, we might find some more productive use for them than warehousing them. And like I said, I don't think we don't look good demagoguing each other, and we need to stop that. Okay? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all for your patience.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard? Are there any additional announcements on the desk? Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Recess for about 15, Amy, 15 minutes? 15 minutes? Mr. President, I would move now that we stand in recess until 10 minutes after 2.
Without objection. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
I would respectfully ask for all members of the Senate Republican caucus to gather in our area immediately for a brief conversation.
Thank the senator. Senator from Hampton, Senator Lott.
Upon recess, I would ask that the Democratic caucus meet as well.
Thank the senator. Without objection, the Senate will stand in recess until 10 minutes after 2.
My Fitbit went off. Oh, they hung up. All right.
It's not like they're just, people that happen to know the governor, they end up on the longest board or something.
Judges, prosecutors, cops, the blame has been kind of diffused around. The parole decision comes down after
Senate will come to order. The senators will please take their seats. Senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn until 12 noon tomorrow.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall the Senate adjourn until 12 noon tomorrow? All
Mr.
in
President.
favor? Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, would the Majority Leader be so generous to yield for a question or two? And,
Senator Yield.
thank you, sir.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
I would preface my question or questions by saying they're not intended to be adversarial or provocative. I would ask the gentleman, first of all, do you have any idea at the moment what our schedule will be going forward? I know that there is a session and committee meetings scheduled tomorrow, but do you have any insight on what may be happening after that for planning purposes?
Just,
Senator's floor.
Again, it's kind of a guesstimate. Obviously, we'll have bills that are coming out of committee. Some are on first reading today. They'll be on second reading tomorrow. They'll be on third reading on Friday. Then I would assume we're going to take off for the weekend. The committee bills that are coming out, reported out today, will be heard Monday next week. And the bills that come out tomorrow, probably Tuesday, just going day by day. So that's roughly, I mean, can things change? Sure. But absence of waiving constitutional readings, and of course, what we didn't count on was so many people testifying on each bill, which I guess is a lot easier to do when you don't have to leave your living room and drive 100 miles or 200 miles to Richmond. So it's hard to give you a time estimate of how everything will go, but essentially we'll plan on being here tomorrow, plan on being here Friday, plan on being here Monday and Tuesday. Maybe Monday we'll know what it's going to look like, for the next couple of days after that. That's the best I can tell you, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, I appreciate the gentleman's response, and if he perhaps would yield for a more amorphous question.
Senator Yield? Sure. Senator Yield, you have the floor.
Mr. President, my question would be is that there is a total absence of predictability on what our colleagues in the House of Delegates are doing. The only thing that I have seen is a comment in the media that they were not going to do anything for 5 days, so that would be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday, that they would do something. But once they do go into session and start dealing with their legislation, I would be very surprised to see the constitutional readings waived in the House of Delegates. Are they communicating with your leadership whatsoever as we're going forward, looking beyond Friday and Monday and Tuesday?
But
Senator's the floor.
They haven't with either Senator Locke. They haven't with Senator Locke or myself or Senator Lucas. They have not. And, we can probably get our stuff all out by the middle of next week, except for the budget. And Senator Howe will, have a better feel for that, maybe early next week or whatever. But, I can't give you a definite schedule because of the bizarre way we're meeting in this session.
Further question?
Mr. President, I appreciate the response, and if I may make a statement, please.
Sure. Senator's floor.
Mr. President, I would say that I have talked with the chair lady of finance, and I appreciate her leadership. But following up on a comment just made by Senator Saslaw, it's going to be a little perplexing to me how we can move our budget forward till we see what bills may be coming from the House and that we in fact would agree upon that have a fiscal impact statement, because we may have to move resources around. And so just for all 40 of us, I'm just trying to get a sense of any perspective that we would have whatsoever on the schedule may be, because many people in here are still working and trying to constantly move things around. And I know that my friends on the other side of the aisle and their leadership respect that, just they're powerless. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Sasslaw.
Yeah, I would say to the Senator from James City County that we probably have had more comprehensive criminal justice type of bills than they had, and we'll deal with that through our budget, the ones that require items. I find it hard to believe that they're going to have something outside of that. They may, but if it doesn't fit in with our budget, then it may not survive a vote. You know, so we'll just have to see. But I would think that they probably don't have a lot that's totally different than what we have, if any. They may, then we'll deal with it.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be recognized? Seeing none. Question is, shall the Senate adjourn until 12 noon tomorrow? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The Senate stands adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow.